Thank you very much. Kate, now we move on to our second panel of the day. We've got a great panel lined up. We will be talking HealthTech before lunch. I'd like to welcome to the stage Bosun Hao from Sailing Capital, Cherry Liu, Red Hill Capital, Dr. Jason Mann, ProMed Advisors, and Furuzon Fazeni from Fresco Capital. Welcome all. Excellent. So we have got a huge topic and not enough time. I do apologize for that. If we just like to move along the line, just give us a minute on who you are and what you do. Bosun.
Sure. So, Bosun Hao, I'm a managing director and partner at Sailing Capital, which is a fund based out of Shanghai and Hong Kong. We currently manage 12 billion renminbi, or roughly about 2 billion US, mainly growth equity investors and late-stage venture capital investors in tech, consumer, and healthcare. We mainly invest overseas, so mostly the US, Western Europe, so you'll probably get a little bit of a bent towards those markets as I share my perspective.
Excellent. Cherry?
I'm Cherry Liu. I'm the founding and managing partner of Red Hill Capital. It's a new fund. It's 100 million US dollar equivalent renminbi fund. And I'm still serving as the venture partner of Sequoia Capital firm. So I worked in Sequoia Capital China for more than 12 years. So I'm always dedicated in healthcare because I'm majored in clinical medicine. Worked in the healthcare industry at various companies for 7 years before I joined Sequoia Capital China in 2005. Very nice meeting.
Great. Hi, everyone. Jason Mann, based here in Hong Kong. Thanks to Michael. It's good to be back at the conference. So I'm a healthcare investor. But a lot of my time with ProMed Advisors works to support healthcare investors and company boards to grow, especially in Asia. So often Western companies looking to Asia for growth, or increasingly Asian companies looking back to the West. So I have background in healthcare as a physician, and then I've spent almost 20 years now, again, focused on building companies and creating value in the space. So happy to be here.
Fuzonfa?
Hello, everybody. Fuzonfa, originally born in Tajikistan, but I've been based in Hong Kong for the past 10 years. With Fresco Capital, investing into healthcare as one of the major pillars, but also in education and work. We feel like there's a lot of synergy between all three of those sectors. We primarily focus on early stage investments with a global mandate, so we don't really have a regional focus. And we love to, enable entrepreneurs to, go get their dream.
Very nice. There's the niceties out of the way. So, healthcare, HealthTech, what's getting you excited right now, Bosun?
Wow, there's lots, but I'll probably share, I think, maybe two things. One, I think an area that I'm particularly interested in is digital therapeutics. So, this is a concept of, is there like an application or something digital that can be prescribed by a physician or clinician to a patient? And, companies such as Pear Therapeutics in the US or Amada Health, both focused on CNS and diabetes respectively. These are interesting platforms where instead of, a physician prescribing a pill, which is the traditional construct, they're prescribing an application that has been through the rigorous testing through the regulatory bodies that have shown real strong efficacy in mitigating disease. And there's been many companies that have taken investment, but I think earlier this year, one of the large multinational pharmaceutical companies, Novartis, did a licensing agreement with Pear. And I think that is showing at least the sea change and eventual shift that there's going to be widespread kind of acceptance, hopefully, of digital therapeutics going forward, because I do think it fills a very unique void and gap in treating patients. And I think from a from an investor perspective, I think why it's intriguing is the digital therapeutics business model is very similar to selling a drug or a biologic in terms of the economics, but the upfront costs of R&D and development aren't, the $500 million, several $100 million to get a drug to commercialization. It's like 50 million or less, maybe. So it's a different paradigm, and as we struggle with R&D productivity in pharma and biotech generally, I think this digital therapeutics area is going to be more intriguing.
Sounds almost too good to be true. A lot cheaper, a lot more effective. I mean, what do you think is some of the big obstacles facing it?
I think this probably highlights, what I'll say is can highlight the differences between China and the US, because I think in the US, the reason why these haven't gotten as much traction is because there's a legacy infrastructure that exists, meaning there's a very well-established healthcare system that is driven largely by the physician. And physicians are very well compensated. They are very territorial. They want to protect the ability to prescribe, their medicines. And also, I think from a patient standpoint, it's very odd to walk into your physician's office and just get told, here's a script to download an app and you have to follow this. We're used to, there's a pill for everything, right? So there has to be this paradigm shift, almost a cultural shift to take acceptance of digital therapeutics in an app as a validated clinically, high clinical utility. But I think in contrast, places like China, and we had talked about this a little bit earlier in the pre-session, was just China, where there's a lack of healthcare infrastructure, lack of drugs to meet the needs of the population, but everyone has a smartphone. They have several smartphones, and if you could deliver this, you could forego the typical healthcare infrastructure that's needed to deliver pills, but rather now you can deliver an app that has tremendous, efficacy, and that, in a place like China where the opportunity is like pill or no pill, maybe you can gravitate towards an app, and there isn't that legacy infrastructure to prohibit it.
Yeah. Cherry.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Our new fund is quite interested in the cross-border academic collaboration. For example, we are approaching Stanford University's biodesign. We think currently, and the trend is like we look good, and a blockchain application in healthcare, and more use of AI in healthcare, and some stronger push for cloud service in healthcare. So all these kind of things are different. Not only clinical medicine or pharmaceutical industry, there are different academic collaboration like engineering and electronics and blockchain and some calculation, quantum calculation like that. So we will spend, I think, more than half of our time and money investing into this kind of areas. Personally, last year and this year, I continue to reviewing a lot of deals like more use of an analytic use of data like EHR data. Like last year, I invested a company. They are using the EHR, natural language, the history, medical records to do some analysis reports and some disease resolution for doctors particularly in immunology diseases. This year, I'm looking for this kind of resolution in other disease areas. So, and I also like to look at the more robotics application in healthcare. In China, there are a lot of teams. They are trying to making cheaper and less how to say, not so span application of Darwin key. Maybe just one area focused small Darwin key, so that they can avoid a high price. If you are too expensive, the robotics can't be sold a lot in China because there is a price limitation in China. So that's why until now, not a great number of robotics sold in China. So if we can make a cheaper one and with very decent or reasonable application, that's enough for a lot of China hospitals. So this is kind of one of our direction too.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's a few directions. Some good points. I'll definitely come back when it comes to cloud and data. Jason, what's getting you excited?
Yes, so some great points here. I think safety also comes to mind. Integrating, I think we heard with Alcidion earlier, integrating real-time data to support clinical decision-making and to flag high-risk decisions, high-risk patients, to monitor this. I think that helps to work, especially within established systems. It helps to work within the system to kind of reform it. I think the payers, the healthcare systems have a vested interest in reducing errors and reducing costs associated with that. I think another area that I've been looking at some is the security, the reliability. You know, as we all know, if an app that you play a game on goes down, it's not a big deal, right? But if something is related to your health, that's suddenly quite a lot more serious. So I think part of the path to broader acceptance of this is showing regulators and patients, not to mention the care providers, that yes, this is reliable, right? You can use this, and the interoperability is reasonable, and the data security is reasonable. Again, I think that's something that we haven't fully solved yet. Yeah. And I think classically at tech conferences, we talk a lot about tech, which is obviously very important, and yet the social acceptance of that and even the regulatory environment is, I think, also quite important. I think this is an area where China has shown a lot of strength. I think we've seen it in fintech and then in AI. I think increasingly e-health and using a smartphone for a wide variety of healthcare services, including talking to your doctor, will be more and more common in China and potentially leapfrog to a leading position globally. So I think that's an area where a few factors come into China's favor. Yeah, there's a lot of others. I think mental health is one that combines, we're on our phones so much. What if we could use it as a tool to support, you heard about meditation and mindfulness, but even full-on clinical mental health. I think there's probably a key part to play there, and companies that can show efficacy, show safety. There's just tremendous potential globally as populations age, as healthcare systems become overloaded. The ability to again, as with PAIR, to care for patients digitally scales so much more easily.
Furu.
The paradox of choice. It got so inspired by so many different directions, and I had a couple in my head, so I don't know what to pick now. Yeah. I really don't know. I'm going to try to be brief. I can talk about one thing that we've seen as a fund. We've done over 60 investments now. Is a lot of these companies, and as with Cherry with Red Hill Capital, they're looking at companies that are cross-border. We feel like healthcare and health tech has been very insular. It's very isolated. It's usually only US-centric or only China-centric. And you had the bio aspects, which was more cross-border because there was an infrastructure of being cross-border. But from a digital health perspective, there hasn't been as much cross-border. There hasn't been as much global. And that's a trend that I'm very excited about. And I can give a couple of examples.
Please do.
Yeah. So I'll give an example from our portfolio company and an example from outside of our portfolio company. One of our portfolio companies called Base Pair, out of New York. And this is how global it is. Founder is born and raised in India, did multiple degrees in the US, postgraduate degrees in artificial intelligence and in digital health, and now came up in genomics actually, and came up with this product that is a cloud-based solution to help researchers in genomics clean up their data. So I'm not nearly smart enough to understand what that means, but what they do is, once you have extrapolated all the genomics data that you need, it's not in a usable format. So what you have to do as a researcher or as a laboratory is you have to manually clean up this data. And it's expensive enough where you need you can't outsource it to a firm, or you can't get an undergraduate to do it. So you'll need a graduate or a researcher to do it, but it's too expensive to hire a researcher. So you have this middle ground where you can bring in a technology like Base Pair and completely clean up that data. So now all you have to do is extract your genomics data, upload it to Base Pair, it cleans up the data, and you as a researcher or a laboratory can immediately start working on what you're actually supposed to be doing, like identifying diseases, curing, seeing patterns, and that has become a global product because DNA data is global, right? Data in US is exactly the same data as it is in Germany, as it is in South America, as it is in Asia. And they've started to build distribution systems all over the world. And you would not have seen that 10 years ago. And I think that's a trend with the internet, with mobile, with globalization that's becoming very, very powerful.
Yeah, it seems all our conversations tend to lead back in some form or another to security and almost privacy, because you're talking about all this extra data. I mean, when Sony PlayStation got hacked and people lost their game data and credit cards, they were upset. How upset would they be if all of their medical data was stolen, or used against them? I mean, how best can we allay these concerns?
I want to bring an example. NHS got famously, what did they call that bot?
The ransom bot.
The ransom bot. WannaCry, yes, WannaCry. Who remembers WannaCry with NHS? Yes, there's one. Our cameraman.
He caused it, yeah.
I knew it. But health data is a fascinating Venn diagram of being the most valuable data set we have as humanity and the least secured.
Yeah.
Right? It's terrible. Yeah. Because if you look at physicians, independent physicians, they don't have the infrastructure to protect the data, right? And not only cybersecurity, but social security, right? A lot of hacking, and we've looked at security companies, a lot of hacking is done socially. I can come in and try to figure out a way into your system without actually being a computer scientist, right? And that is increasingly the biggest challenge with a lot of health institutions, because doctors will see emails, and it's a phishing email. It's a very basic code, but because they made it and embedded it into a social aspect, you get hacked.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Any questions so far from the audience? No. Tough crowd.
One here.
Oh, hello. Yep.
Hi, Michelle from Monkside Ventures. So I'm curious, how do you see some of the tensions between some of the solutions based on data becoming more global and some of the regulatory trends towards pushing for more data localization in specific markets?
Did I take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately data in healthcare is global, because I think these solutions do cross borders. But particularly if you look at like genomics data, I mean, it's fairly particular to a certain ethnicity or a certain region. So I think inevitably, there's kind of this push to be able to share data kind of globally and be more collaborative, because at the end of the day, rather than keeping it kind of within your own fiefdom, if you will, to share it, I think leverages the work that everyone is doing globally. So I think ultimately there's a push to go forward that way, but largely people create companies because they're businesses, and they want to be able to reap the rewards and monetize that technology. So you're seeing a lot of these battles, particularly on the genomic side, where companies have established themselves in the US, but they're expanding now into, let's say, Asia, because they realize Asia has a very deep wealth of knowledge in genetic data. Grail is an excellent example of that. So it's, I think, and then in China, I think from a standpoint of privacy, I don't want to be so just trite, but privacy is not as big of an issue here in China as it is in the US, and therefore, or Western markets. So I think those regulatory, or lack thereof, regulatory barriers will enable countries like China and those who are starting their innovation here to accelerate their development much more quickly.
Do you think it's going to be fairly deregulated for the foreseeable future? Is anything that's going to happen to... Can you see emulating the West more moving forward? Or maybe the West is going to start emulating China more and deregulating?
Can I add a little bit to the data?
Please do.
And globalization? It's a tough problem. It's a very, very tough problem. We've seen that with, if we take one step back, with tech companies, right? So Facebook is forced to create data servers on shore in a lot of jurisdictions, from Russia to Europe, because of this regulation, right? Health and regulations in general are always going to be a laggard. So they're going to lag behind getting the right regulations, getting the regulations out there. And so health is not an exception. What has happened is it's going to increase the cost of going global, right? So you'll have to have local presences in those countries and be regulatory compliant. It's just, it's a fact of nature today. Another aspect of it will be enforcement, because a lot of these regulatory bodies will not understand what and how the data is being processed, right? So with base pair, it's on a cloud, right? But the cloud is on Amazon, right? Amazon's infrastructure is both in Europe, Asia, US, so that kind of helps the whole situation. So what we're seeing as a trend is a lot of these cloud-based solutions are becoming compliant to regulations, right? So if the infrastructure providers become compliant, I think Microsoft Azure has been pushing that trend where they're like, yeah, we are, HIPAA compliant, we're this compliant. So they're trying to make the infrastructure level a lot more compliant with global data regulations, which allows other companies to build on top of them and become more compliant. But when a company becomes larger, like Facebook, like LinkedIn, like Telegram, you will have to have local silos.
Sherry?
Yeah, I have slightly different opinion. I think data is a very important asset of the country. So from the point of this view, I think the countries would be pay more attention to the protection of those data, especially in healthcare. So the regulation would be more and more stronger. This is my opinion, because we saw some change, like the Amazon cloud. If it's going to be operated in China, they need to register it in a Chinese company, maybe based in the west of the country. For healthcare, historically, the exchange of data is very difficult. I think it's the same in United States or in Europe. Every hospital have their own HIS system, but they won't exchange their data. This is for the benefit of the hospitals. They won't disclose to their competition. But from the national side, it's about safety, not only about privacy. Privacy is one of the consideration, but if your enemy country have all your population's gene data. So they can easily make a gene weapon, like that. So this is about the safety, I think. An asset. A lot of new drugs are doing multiple center clinical trials around the world. So this kind of data then would be global, then share the data between countries. But for some population data, like or other sensitive informations, informations like sample, biosample bank, blood bank, like kind of this information, this would be very important and strongly be regulated. Thank you.
Okay. Jason, do you have anything to add?
I agree. I think there's these trends moving in different directions, and it's interesting to hear as I'm listening to the panelists. In some markets, it seems that the government is a primary driver, and in other markets, it's more companies that are the primary driver, and the government is setting some ground rules, but aside from that, not developing, say, a national policy on a certain area. So it's quite interesting. I think in some ways it's not unlike what we're seeing in fintech and banking, where you have, again, a mix of kind of national priorities and private companies in seeking commercial gain. So to me, this is an area to watch. I think there's a middle ground, right? I think a few years ago, it seemed to me that the tech giants were getting a little ahead of themselves and saying, hey, look at, we're worth hundreds of billions of dollars. In a sense, we can do whatever we want. And I said, you know what? I think there's an implicit social contract. There's an implicit government angle to this, right, that allows you to operate as Facebook, as Google. And so in some sense, it's not entirely surprising to see the sort of company overreach slightly or be a little sloppy, and then have social pushback, have government pushback. And I think you kind of find your way between these two extremes in that, along that path. And I think there's a similar path in healthcare. I think, I agree that China has some advantages with the cultural and regulatory environment, large population, a government focus on AI, and finding cost-effective healthcare solutions. I think in the West, healthcare companies face a lot of pressure from, as Cherry said, local hospitals, local care providers who just aren't used to digitizing these things. And I think the payers can be part of the solution in that space. So you talk to companies here, especially if you're working with something that touches a healthcare system, pressure from the payer can be an effective tool that eventually kind of brings the care provider, brings the local hospital in line, and it's in the name of safety, in the name of efficiency. And so I think the broad trend is there, although, unfortunately, it's been slower probably than most of us would like. I mean,
hospitals themselves are quite conservative by nature, yes, aren't they, right? So
exactly.
It's not going to happen overnight. We've got 30 seconds left. 30 seconds to ask these lovely people any questions that come to mind. No, tough audience, tough crowd today. Okay, well, Vic, lunch is coming up now. I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Thank you so much, all four of you, for coming along. It was a huge topic. I think we've dented it slightly. But anyway, thank you so much. And I'll see you all at 2 o'clock for our final sessions at One-to-One Tech. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.